Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Kanatham. Today I'm going to be explaining what a REST API is, using something that all of us know, Spotify. And by the end of this talk, you'll understand what an API is, how Spotify uses one, and why this really matters for applications, devices, and anything that really connects to Spotify. So let's start with a simple scenario. Let's say that you want to connect your Spotify account to something like your Alexa, your Stream Deck, any sort of external application. The question is, how can you get them to communicate with Spotify? Right? When we want these devices or applications to talk to Spotify, there are a couple abilities that we want to be able to do, right? Let's say we want to add or delete from the Spotify queue. We want to see what the song is playing, what song is currently playing. We want to skip or go back to a different track, and just in general, we want to control the playback. The problem is that all these different apps, they all need a standardized way to ask Spotify for this information, and that's where REST API comes in. Now, what is a REST API? Before diving too deep into Spotify, REST stands for Representational State Transfer. That sounds really complicated. All this really means is that it's a set of rules for how apps communicate over the internet. A REST API is basically a standardized, predictable way for one program to talk to another. It's a simple, standardized throughout the industry. Everybody is going to use the same format. It's scalable, it's stateless. Spotify doesn't need to remember anything about your last request. It is stateless, purely stateless. Every request is carrying its own information, and it's scalable. As your application or the information that you want to transfer is becoming more and more complex, you can change how that information is processed or changed, and it's high performance. It's way faster than reloading a website every time something changes on your website, or reloading your connection to the application every single time you want to play or pause or skip or add something to the queue. And so, before we talk about REST API, we need to make sure that we have a foundation on what client-server communication, how that works. So, an HTTP request is basically a tiny message that your app on your computer is sending through your browser, right? HTTP, HTTPS, you've seen this in front of URLs, right? That is hypertext transfer protocol. Hypertext is the language in which websites are created, and it's the protocol that is transferring those websites, right? You are sending an HTTP request to Spotify's web server to send that website to right back to your client or your browser, right? And an HTTP request, right, in our instance, we want to know what song is playing right now. So you would send an HTTP request to this web server, this Spotify web server. It's going to process that information, crunch, and it's going to send that HTTP response to your browser. Once the server gets this request, we want it to say, here's the current song. I added this to your queue. The track is skipped successfully, right? But before REST APIs were created, you would have to refresh that page, and then you would see that here's the current song, right? And let's say that you've been listening to Spotify for 30 minutes. Your song is not 30 minutes long. It's going to say that it's on, let's go back. It's on the title track by Origami Angel, but it's actually at Where the Heart Is by Sweet Pill, right? And so REST APIs come in, and whenever an app needed that, whenever that app needs that information, it'll just send that information, and it's not as slow, it's not as efficient, and it's not going to waste the amount of data that it used to client server communication used to do, right? So here's a actual diagram of how this REST API model works. Instead of reloading everything, with this model, without reloading everything, your app can just say, just tell me what song is playing right now. Your app can just ask to add one track to the queue, and it can ask one specific piece of information, right, instead of reloading. Right? That's the beauty of this whole thing. All right, let's go through the REST API model. On the left, we have the client. This could be your Spotify app, your phone, your computer. Yeah. It sends, just like in this previous request method, it's sending a request. These four are called HTTP request methods, right? Get is used whenever a client wants to read something, like checking what song is currently playing. Post is used to create something, like you're creating an object, you're creating a new entry in the queue, so you're just adding a track to the queue. Put is to update, like if you want to update the pause/play button, if you want to change the state from pause to play, you update that button, right? And delete is if you want to take something away from the queue, right? If you want to delete that, right? So the request then goes to the REST API, acts like the messenger, acts like the server, at server, or like or the waiter at a restaurant, right? These four are like your menu. These four are your menu. This is your waiter. The waiter then sends that request to the kitchen, to the server, right? That server will process or make that food, right? And passes that food, that request, that information back to the API, and your waiter will send you that food, right? That processed food in three different ways: through JSON, through something called XML or HTML. I'll show you what a JSON looks like in a second, but I want to show you this is what the model is. It's kind of like a menu, a kitchen, and a waiter, right? Just overall model, one sentence. Your app makes a request these four different ways. The API will talk to the server. That server will respond back, and that API sends back to your app. And this back and forth process is the foundation of how all apps work today, right? This is not just Spotify. This is all apps. All apps communicate in this way. So remember we talked about HTTP request methods, those four: put, post, get, put, delete. A good way to remember that is the acronym CRUD, right? This is the actual way that information goes through the API. We talked about how where is it? Oh, it's not. Right here. So get is reading, we're retrieving info. Put is updating information. Delete is obviously deleting. Post is creating. We talked about how Spotify does that. And so let's look at an actual API request. up here, um, this is what a API request will look like if you're in the real world. When your app is sending a request to Spotify, it has four different parts to it. It's got the method, right? In this instance, it's post. So um, you're creating something. Uh, it's using this header, right? The header is the authentication token, and the authentication token basically proves to Spotify that you are who you say you are, and it's giving the app permission to control the account. So in this instance, the username is Spotify and the password is password123 hashtag. The endpoint is just the URL that you're calling. This is where is the API supposed to get the information or put the information, and the body is the information that it needs to create in this specific location. So what is this actually doing? Right? Let's go to the next slide. This is the same thing in the last slide. This is post, which is a create, right? Creating in the queue this information. You're adding track 123 to the queue. That's what that REST API is doing. You're adding something to the queue. Read. This is a little unintuitive, but you're reading what is playing, right? You're reading what item is currently inside the player, so you're getting what song is currently playing. Putting, you're updating the next button, and so it's basically like you're clicking the next button and you're skipping, right? And delete, you're deleting from queue, so you're deleting items from the queue. And every app device, every website, even the Spotify web player itself are using these real Spotify REST examples whenever it's doing any actions on the actual website. And so those requests, what is it going to respond with? It responds with something as small as this, right? When you're asking what is, like when you're reading this information, when you're getting what's in the player, this is exactly what you get. You get that it is playing, and you get what is playing. And in this instance, Kill Bill by SZA is playing. See how small this is compared to if you look at the actual HTML on this website. Like, see how big this is. I'm just inspect elementing on this website because I'm in Google Slides. All of this information, if it had to reload all of this information, it would be way too much for any server to handle. Instead, it's just doing 4 lines. 4 lines, right? Your app is reading JSON and it's updating the UI in real time, and it's showing you exactly what is playing. And so with our previous diagram, we had a client through the browser go to the web server, and then that web server goes straight to the browser, and then it's the same person, right? But in this instance, when you have a RESTful API, you can ask for something on a different platform. Alexa, play Despacito. You send that command through the API. Spotify takes action on this computer, right? Obviously, like, this is just the example. It's not actually going to play Kill Bill SZA. It's going to play Despacito if you ask for Despacito. Spotify will receive the request. It'll update your playback state, and then your speakers will just start playing the song. And with just only with only information as small as this. And that's really the REST APIs in action. REST APIs let any app communicate with each other using extremely simple web rules. And it, like, these CRUD actions are extremely simple to use. Um, Everything that you do in Spotify, play, pause, skip. If you look at this GIF that I added, all of these things, adding a image to a playlist, changing the playlist name, um, all of these actions are going through the Spotify API because they're very small things that you don't need to reload an actual web page to do. Um, and a phone uses a different language than a web browser. A REST API can update information, um, because a website uses HTTP. A phone will use a whole different language to show the user, that same information. And so, since a REST API is standardized, it is able to be shown on multiple different platforms. That's just the beauty of what a REST API is. Um, Thank you so much for listening. If you have any other questions, please let me know. You have a wonderful day.